Yeah, I kind of enjoy these because I mean, one, they're very rule based, of course, but the second thing about them is that you never quite finish with them. They're not only skill building and they teach you a system, but they're open. Every time you do them, you get a little better. But then every time also you discover new things like, I did that this time. Maybe that's a good idea. Or maybe that midpoint is a little lower. Or maybe that's a little higher, etc. You always discover more, which is the fascinating thing about such a simple system. And yet it's almost endless. You can spend a lifetime making them. Right, so double pencils, excellent for uh, doing almost an X-ray of the letter shapes, uncovering their inner structures, so to speak. Um, the dynamics of the broad edge pen are sort of uncovered by these dual linear tools. Now, they would represent on a pen the edges of the pen, right? So that you're getting a dual linear writing tool instead of a monolinear writing tool, which would be like a pencil or a fiber tip or something like that. Anyways, here we go. Dual linear shapes. Now, the pen is generally held at an angle, so I would beg you to take note of the following. Now, what I would start off with is the weight in relation to the height. So what we're getting here is in pen widths 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, approximately 8 pen widths to the height. Um, Now you can increase the space between the double pencils. Now I've used masking tape, but the best thing to use is definitely would be a rubber band, which would be better. If I make a stroke down like this with the pen held at say 15 to 20 degrees, let's say 15, I will get a stem which is not the whole pen width because I'm holding the pen at an angle. So basically, there are two ways of measuring the height to the weight. The first one is in pen widths. I will abbreviate that to be 8 pen widths like that. Now, the other way of measuring it is by measuring the stem width, which is not the whole pen width. Do you understand? And say that that's one module, which would mean that in this instance, it would be, we will end up with approximately 10 modules high a letter. And the reason why, well, to go into it a little bit more, if I do hold the pen at an angle and I do a diagonal stroke this way, I'm getting the full pen width. This is a full pen width because it's a diagonal stroke, whereas a straight stroke with the pen held at an angle gives me a slightly thinner stroke than that. Right, now for the actual letters, I'm going to write a Roman proportioned letter H using double pencils. If you find it hard at that size, breathe out when you do the stroke. That should help you get a straight stroke. Let's do another. Now, what I want to do now is I want to clean this up. So this is the start. It uncovers the structure. What I want though is I want a stroke which is swelling. I want a stem of the letter to be swelling a little bit. I want it to be thicker top and bottom. I also want to straighten it up a little bit. It's a little bit leaning forwards a little bit too much. Now it's better. Use the eraser actively to clean things up a little. So it's got a slight curvature to it. I'm using the natural curve of the hand to do that. Also on this side, needs to be a little bit straighter, leaning a little bit too much forwards. Is okay. And what you can do is, because I'm using this natural curve, right, you can turn the sheet instead, so that when you're working on the other side, you want the stem to be slightly curved, so you can use the same principle of using your hand almost like a compass, like with a natural curve to it, pivoting on this knuckle. Turn it. Okay, checking, turning, back. I don't mind if it's leaning slightly forwards. It's handmade. It will naturally happen when we write things by hand, that it has a slight movement forwards, for right-handers at least. Right, now, you see what I've done here. So, another thing to notice is that where a broad edge pen hits the shoulder line and the baseline, I'm just exaggerating this now for you, shoulder line and baseline, it's a little bit above on that side and a little bit below on that side. So, you know, it's for optical reasons, I'm crossing over the shoulder line a little because it's letting in space here, so I'm compensating by cutting across the baseline and the shoulder line a little bit like that. It's the same for pointed shapes, top and bottom, and also for some rounder shapes, which would do the same. They would go slightly above the shoulder line, top and bottom, for letters like O, bottom of S, top of S, etc. Right, so now I've got one module here, 10 modules tall. What I'm doing with this mid stroke is I want approximately, I want less than half the module for the mid stroke. Okay, so this less than half a module. Now I've drawn these, so I've gotten rid of this broad edge ending, and I'm kind of simplifying this because I want to draw them in more later, and this is my starting point. Okay, so the next shape would be the N, which has the same width, but I need to steepen the pen angle for the top and bottom strokes, because I want them to be thin. Steepen also the pen angle for the diagonal, because I don't want it to be too heavy. It would be if I just keep it to the same pen angle, but I don't want it to be too heavy, so I want it to be a similar width to the straight stroke. Now adjusting the pen angle from 10, 15 to about 60 degrees. I'm not measuring. There we are. So that's my basic shape for the N. And now to clean it up, you want it to be going outward a little, to swell a little on this part of that stem. Not here, not here. So I'm going to do that, make it swell a little, top and bottom. And what happens here? Well, you could simply simplify that if you wanted at the bottom. Swelling a little at the bottom. That. seems to me that maybe this is a little bit on the thin side. Actually, I think these should be a slightly less width, because I want them to be less than half the module. So I'm going to thin them a little. Put them on a dite. That's better. See, it goes, this is drawing, lettering by drawing is, you know, it gives you that chance of pre-planning and adjusting as you go along, just a little bit thinner. There we are. Also making sure that this width is less than a module, and the same goes for the bottom of the end. Okay, it just makes for a more harmonious meeting point between the straight strokes and the diagonal there. Right. Now these can be improved upon, but this gives me a framework. T. Flatten the pen angle for horizontals. Okay. Less than half a module. Okay, now clean it up a little, making it swell, especially at the bottom here. Straightening these on the sides. A swelling at the end of that stroke going, the swelling goes downwards here, not on top. Just keep this completely straight on top. A little bit of a swelling here as well, actually. And this side is too wide. Looks too wide. Narrow that down a little. Okay, this is all done by eye, but if you want modules, you can keep this at 8 modules. And the same would go for these. Obviously I haven't measured it, I'm doing it by freehand. So, you know, if you want more precision, you can measure them to be 8 modules wide. All this in this group of letters. And now for the letter U. Now it looks a little bit too flat at the bottom, so I'll fix that when I start drawing it. I want the stems to be swelling a little. I'm going to exaggerate the curve slightly, as if I'm putting pressure on the double-edged writing tool, the broad-edged writing tool. Which I can't do obviously with these because they don't react to pressure. Right? If I had a nib, it's flexible, so I can press, and it would widen a little bit, giving me both a swelled stem and maybe some slightly thicker curves in places. Okay, going up more than I have, so it's not too flat here. Cleaner. I'm drawing using a 4H pencil. Slightly harder one. Now, one of the things, if you draw, you don't want the hairlines, the thinnest part of the letters, to be too thin. If you were working on a typeface, that would be crucial, and then you would have to decide on which size you were aiming at for the type to be reproduced at. Right, so down, flatten, slight swell, and the stroke. And there we are, the U, which would be, and you can flatten these, also be approximately 8 modules wide. Here we are. Now keep the Y, it should have a lowered midpoint, and here's the thin stroke again, should have the same width as the rest of the thin strokes. Over. Oh, it's hard to. Oh, there, it's leaning. I'll fix it. Get with my withdrawing. A little bit thicker at the bottom. Bit of swelling in the stem. Yeah. Swelling on this side only, and this side only. Steepen the pen angle again, it's a diagonal, and if you don't steepen the pen angle, you see, again, it's the same, this principle. If you've got the pen at a diagonal, you're not getting the full width of the pen if you're holding it like that, but you are getting the full width when you're writing a diagonal. And that means that any K and V which doesn't have that adjustment of pen angle will look heavier than an I and an H, for example. And you don't want that. You want an even texture, right? So flatten the pen angle for this the horizontal, because I want it to be the same width approximately as this thin. Okay, and now make it swell here and here a little, and at the bottom, swirling here and here a little. Again, a new diagonal. Right, adjusting the pen angle, so it's quite steep. It's rather like 60, 70 degrees. I haven't measured it. I'm just doing this by eye to create this. It's not too thick. Oops, it's too wide. Swirling a little. Initially, you may initially exaggerate the swelling, which is common. I mean, all beginners exaggerate everything. And I wonder sometimes in teaching whether you should tell people anything because it's all getting twisted anyway. But yeah, it'd be like one of those kung fu masters in Kill Bill. You know, gives rarely gives anything in the form of advice. It's all um, just discipline. There you are. And okay, so that's open. That's open. So we're going to look closer at these shapes next time. But now we've got a kind of a starting point, a pairing, A, V, W. Now, my W, I mean, I've included these monolinear shapes in the form of small diagrams in the workbook. And if you haven't gone through them before, you can do so now. But if you have gone through them, then you can jump straight to these duolinear ones. Okay, but do remind yourself, do remember that the module system only applies to letters with weight. The monolinear system only applies to skeleton shapes. The monolinear system that I have in your workbook is geometrical, whereas this one is module based. So there's two different ways, if you like, to explain the Roman capitals. One applies to skeleton shapes, the other one applies to letters that have weight. Just to be clear on that. All right, W. Now, so my W does not do this. Okay, it's not two V's. I'm narrowing. So what I'm doing to my W is I'm taking these sides and just bending them up, straightening them up a little. Not as much as an upside down M, but enough for you to notice that it's not two V's next to one another. So, and then quite a wide A shape, A-ish shape in the middle. And then a straighter. That. And that ended up too thick and bent at the same time. Which is fine because I can clean it up with drawing. Actually, this should be moved a little bit over. So I'm going to do that too. This is the beauty of drawing, so you can just clean things up gradually. A little bit more. I'll move it over a bit more. Better. And this. A little bit of a swelling. A little bit of a swelling. From here. This needs more work, I can tell. And that's fine. We've got plenty of time to adjust things. It's really hard to get things perfect with these double pencils because you can't really apply much pressure. and it's really easy for them to get shaky and uncertain and everything. So you'll notice once you start working with them that they're not really a walk in the park, but they're giving you a starting point for what we're going to do. So M. The M is not a W upside down. That will make it calf-legged. So the sides of the M are almost straight. Not quite. Almost straight. Straight would make it too static. Almost straight. Steepen pen angle for the diagonal of M. I don't mind it being quite wide. Oops, and I know it's leading forwards, but I don't mind. It happens naturally with written letters that they lean forwards. And typographically, of course, you could just have help lines that help you keep them straight. But doing things freehand has its advantages also. Not for perfection, but for putting life in them. Right, there. Now, this doesn't have much of a swelling. I might have steepened the pen angle a little bit too much so that the stem looks a little bit too narrow, maybe. Just cleaning that up a little. One module. Do something like this. Yeah, I'll just straighten up this last stroke a little bit. I think so it's not leaning too much. I mean, it's just sometimes just a couple of millimeters, or even 1 millimeter can be enough. But I'm just because I know I'm going to draw it afterwards, so I'm just going to do my best. The O normally is just it's not an oval, but it's not a perfect circle. So I'm going to pull it in a little bit on the sides, okay? And I've flattened the pen angle for my O. I've got 10 to 15 degrees. It's slightly tilted. It's not bad for a double pencil O. The little trick with it is that the broad edge pen has this. So in this point where it goes from thin to thick to no, from thick to thin to thick again, you a lot of times you're getting this sunken thing into the shape, and you're getting that with a broad edge pen too. You see, that's the thing. Now, a lot of times I actually, and this is worthy of mentioning, I keep the pen flat and then turn it to come out. And the other way, steepen and then flatten to come out this way, so that I'm getting a smoother transition here. Right? Here and here in the O shape. But that's difficult technically. So, and then there's that. There's the Q, where I go out at a roundabout here. I flatten the pen angle and the stroke itself, so it's quite flat. And out. Again, just turning the page to use the normal movement of the hand when you draw letters. Really helpful. It seems a hassle to move the paper around, but actually it makes the job easier. You're basically just using your body as a tool, not forcing will upon the shape, but rather letting your body, your hand, and the way you can pivot it help you. Right, there's the C, there's the Q. Flatten that a little. I'm going to put the G in here because this is the C. It normally this should flatten on top. It should not go down. It's not completely flat. It's got a slight curve, but it's not following the circle around downwards. It's in between flattening and following the O shape down. Okay. But this, because of the broad edge pen going thin, you might have a little bit more of a upward lean to that. The G, I'll just simplify by going down like that. And then if you have a G, this should definitely flatten at the bottom. And that's a drawing thing that you need to do, flatten at the bottom. A little bit of a swelling here. C and G in one. Yep. And narrow letters. Round and narrow letters. R, B, P, etc. Let's start with the R because it's such an essential letter. I always, with capitals, I normally start with the R. It contains a straight stroke, a round stroke, sometimes a horizontal and a diagonal. And that's all you need. All the strokes you need is in the R. So let's see. Okay. Now you have a choice. You can keep it open, or you could have a stroke coming over here. All right, so the horizontal is optional. I'm going to start off with it without and then put in the horizontal after. So this, steepen the pen angle because you've got a diagonal, steep 70 degrees, 60, 70. And I'm aiming from behind that corner somewhere, and I'm putting it down after this has gone quite thin. Quite thin, steepen the pen angle, go down. Do not be afraid to go outside of its upper body. And here we are. And swelling. I might even add a little bit of weight to this, as if I'm using a little bit of pressure. Just a little nuance. It's a key letter to get the Roman capitals right. So I always start with it because it tells me a lot about how the other letters would look. You see, because if this isn't, for example, completely round, if it's sort of squared off, it's a squared off circle in a sense, it would dictate all the other round ones to be related to it. because then they would be have to be squared off round as well. See, that sort of thing. And yeah. Okay, so now for the flatten the pen angle for the horizontal and aim for this to unify this problematic area by going in both sides. Oops, and it's too heavy. So you see what happens in the Roman inscriptions basically is that they're using a brush. So they're going down and they're thinning out that bit with the Roman brush lettering. So basically I'm putting in almost a cuneiform kind of shape there. It's not uniformly thin. Now it's a little exaggerated, so I'm gonna this point, this exact point where all these meet is the kind of the clue, the key to unlock the R, basically. You know, if you've got if you're very clear about that, then a lot of things are solved. Okay. You might argue that my midpoint is a little bit low, and I would tend to agree, but it's interpretation also. So I'm going to leave it because I think the shape is good. But you might argue that you want to put it a little bit higher. The thing is, you should put it lower than the mathematical midpoint. Yeah, that's the main point. The rest is interpretation. And I once had a talk with Carl Georg Hofer, the German type designer calligrapher, arguing for about 20 minutes about the Roman R because we disagreed. He put the midpoint somewhere else. You see, but that's part of the fun of this. You know, we never do things quite the same, even though they're Roman capitals. So there's the R. Now the P is just copying what you're doing here. Okay? The P is just the first part of the R. And just leave it open. The P is already in here. The B, I sometimes, when I do this with a broadish pen or even a brush, I tend to do this, turn it to steeper and then flatter again. So I'm actually going to mimic that here by making this thinner. Add a little bit more weight in this. Yeah, but you see some of these are open already and they're kind of, they're pointing towards what we're going to do with these dual linear shapes after it. Like next time. D. I've forgotten the D and EFS. Yeah, I've forgotten the D. I'll just put it here. rather wide, but not quite the width of the O. Sometimes this is when it's drawn, this is rounded off on the inside, in fact. So, you might want to do that at this point also. The D is a little bit narrow, on the narrow side, actually, compared with the G. It is. I'm going to do this again, the stroke. Wider. Difficult to get. Right. Better? A little better. Again, pretending I've got a pen and I'm putting a little bit more pressure around the curve. Yeah. And turning the pen a little so that it's thinner. Yeah. Let's see what happens next time. Okay. D. All right. E, F, S. Flatten the pen angle for horizontals. You want them to be thinner than half the thinner than half the stem. Okay, and I want it to swell a little, top and bottom, swelling. Swell at the bottom of that stroke, but keep the top one straight. And the opposite at the bottom, swell this one, but keep the bottom one straight. This straight and swelling on the outside. These are almost aligned. The two top ones are almost aligned. For the F, the mid-stroke is lower. For the E, the mid-stroke is higher than the mathematical midpoint. They're almost aligned. Top one might be a tad wider, but not much. S. Flatten and flatten. A little bit top and bottom part. Now it's leaning too much forwards, but I can fix that. I can just do that. See what we're going to do about the S next time. Interesting letter. Most people actually make it into a swan, so try to avoid that kind of thing. Oh, look at my terribly shaky swan. I'm not good at drawing. Okay, K Z. A thin point. Sorry, a thin diagonal. Make it half, less than half the width. Now for the K, I sometimes it doesn't even touch the stem. Okay, so try not to keep this overlapping. I keep a little distance to the stem here. Steepen the pen angle for the diagonal and make it almost 90 degrees to this one. Okay. So now make a little swelling. Swelling here at the bottom. Oops. Yep. This swelling really helps the letters get life, you see, because the double pencils, they really create a little bit of a static line. You can't do much in terms of pressure, and so yeah, it's a really good trick to put life into the letters. The X, steepen the pen angle, of course, new diagonal coming up. And a thin diagonal there. Create a bit of swell. The Z, in Roman, the Romans didn't have Z. So, um, but I preferred in this system of letter forms, I preferred to have a thin and then the thick being in the middle. I have to flatten the pen angle completely for this diagonal to be thick. 0 degrees. Down and rather flat pen angle for the horizontal. Put in a little bit of swelling. Flat on top. I am almost there, but I'm gonna actually my set now is asymmetrical. I'll fix that next time. Because I want to show you the high resolution of Briam's wonderful what he calls a split alphabet. So let's fix that next time. All right, an overview of those. I have letters like the J. I can put it in. It's an odd letter because it goes below the line. So just go below. And there are several different ways of solving this issue at the bottom. But let's say it has a little bit of a thickening just for now and a swelling. And there we go.